Good afternoon, everyone. This is Finance Committee Chair Gary Martin. I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order, and we can begin with a roll call. Ms. Rodriguez, would you please call the roll?
Gladly, Chair Martin. Give me one moment. Make my switch here. Okay, so committee member. Committee Chair Martin.
Present.
Thank you. Committee member Millibar.
Here.
Thank you. And committee member Palmer.
Here.
Right, thank you.
Excellent. We can now move on to item 3, public comment on items not on the agenda. If you wish to make public comment, we request that you submit a request through the QR code noted on the agenda. In addition, attendees may provide public comment during the meeting by submitting a comment card or using the raise hand function on the Zoom platform. Those participating by phone can press *9 to raise their hand. Do you have any public comment for item 5?
Committee Chair Martin, we do not have any public comment requests at this time.
Thank you very much. That takes us to item 4A, minutes from the last committee meeting.
We approve.
Pardon. Our only action item is approval of the minutes for the April 17th, 2025 meeting. Do you have any public comment before we call for a motion?
Chair Martin, we do not.
I'd entertain a motion for approval of the minutes of the April 17th, 2025 meeting.
Okay, I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Chair Martin,
Aye.
committee member Millibar,
Aye.
committee member Palmer.
Aye.
Thank you. Meeting minutes approved.
Very good. That takes us pretty much to the meat of this meeting, which will be item 5A, fiscal year 25-26 draft budget review. Presenter will be our Executive Director, Graham Bradner. Please proceed, Mr. Bradner.
Thank you, Chair Martin. I'll let Claudia. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and move in. So the agenda for the presentation, we'll just first touch on the timeline. Just again, as a reminder, there's a lot happening here. So we steer towards completing this fiscal year review and planning, setting up for next fiscal year. Then we've got a more detailed review of the proposed scope and budget for next fiscal year, and then time for any questions, any other detail related items we want to get into. Next slide. So the timeline here, you can see the red bar that cuts across there. We're sitting here May 21st. This is our second Finance Committee meeting, the first meeting where we share and discuss the full details of the proposed budget. And then we have our third meeting planned for June 12th, where any revisions necessary from today's meeting, we do have some revisions anticipated that I will touch on and describe. But then we would come back June 12th with our final revised budget to allow the committee to consider recommending to the full board adoption at the June 18th meeting. So we've still got a couple of steps here, but we're working our way through the process. Okay. So thank you. Just to highlight scope of services first, reflecting back on this past fiscal year, which we're not quite done with. You know, again, you see on both sides in terms of 24-25, and then next year we have that continue to support DWR permitting efforts. That is still a priority until we're done with those major permit activities still targeted for the end of 2026. Looking at FY 24-25 accomplishments, you'll recall we released the updated Class 4 cost estimate last May of 2024. Quite a bit of communication that was carried on through the fiscal year, pretty really through the remainder of the calendar year and beyond. Getting around meeting the various water agencies, whether direct participants or member agencies of our participating water agencies, anybody who was interested in understanding the costs of the project as well as the benefits of the project. It's quite a bit of work to get around and communicate that information. We've continued to work on design, construction, contracting innovations, really focused on improving or refining the project definition, constructability, reducing impacts, checking as many boxes as we can. Of course, internal to the organization, we've now got a clear focus on the organizational growth and transition, recognizing that the organization we had in place was really focused on that permit support role. But we clearly need to be ready for in the event that we're transitioning to delivery. We need to be ready. We've got a lot of work to do internally to be ready. Number of actions today at the board meeting are going to help position us for that. But that work is going to continue and was a real focus, especially over the last 6 months. On the communications front, quite a bit of work. I think a lot of really good materials, the Closer Look series, tours that we have run through the Delta, fact sheets, translated materials, just continuing to ensure that we've got clear information that we're sharing with the public about various aspects of the project. And then the big push through the latter part of last year, early part of this calendar year, has been to work with each of our participating public water agencies to articulate the work plan through the end of 2027 and secure funding to cover that work plan, which I'm happy to say all of the water agencies have committed to participating at least at their existing levels. And so we have a very clear scope of work with the funding to support it. And so now it's all the work necessary to really kind of deliver on those commitments and position ourselves to follow through and deliver this project on time. So our priorities for the upcoming fiscal year, as I mentioned, the ongoing permit support, but it's really the engineering analyses and documentation for that system-wide basis of design report, moving the overall level of design from 10 up to 20%, which is a pretty big push for a project of this scale. I can just give you a sense of what that means. Currently, we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 170 to 175 maybe design sheets associated with the concept design. By the time we develop this basis of design report, we're likely to have over 1,000 design sheets. And those design sheets themselves aren't necessarily the metric, but it's what's included on those design sheets and the fact that those are the sheets necessary to really display the level of detail that we're going to need to support a Class 3 estimate. So, but I do think it is an interesting sort of scale thing to check in on. The cost estimating work itself will start next spring. So within this upcoming fiscal year, we'll kick that off. But then both the release of the BODR and the updated cost estimate and any financial feasibility analysis that is also performed will all come out as part of the following fiscal year, FY 26-27. So this year is really all about doing the work and then kicking off the cost estimate next spring once the engineering work has been allowed to progress. The environmental effort is really starting to ramp up. It has traditionally been for the past several years, just really acting as the liaison between the engineering work and DWR's permitting teams. But now we're approaching the time frame that we really need to dig into the environmental compliance aspect of the work. And so how will we actually ensure compliance, the different roles and responsibilities of the entities involved, who's going to be in charge of submitting to the various regulators. There's really a myriad of details that we need to sort through from an environmental compliance perspective. And so first developing that plan and then establishing the systems for monitoring, tracking, and reporting is also now sort of a dual priority for the environmental team. And then, as I mentioned, on the program front, we've got just a pretty large lift in front of us in terms of necessary standards, procedures, requirements, so that we can actually procure designers, contractors. How are the various systems that we run gonna work for that phase of the program, and how are we going to ensure that we've got a real attractive environment to pull in and attract quality bidders, and ensure that the DCA is a place where the industry really wants to come and do work for us to help deliver this project. So here's our summary of the FY 25-26 proposed budget. It is proposed at $65 million. That compares to our current budget, our current FY 24-25 budget of $43,200,000. We are introducing a few new tasks with this, but they're buried within the existing work breakdown structure, so they're not terribly obvious. It's row 220, PMO survey and mapping. That's a new item for this fiscal year. And then down in 410, PD project geotechnical now also includes surveying and other subtasks within that. Just doing the side by side as a starting point, you can get a sense of where the costs are coming in and where the differences are. The program management office, which includes the executive office, community engagement, controls, admin, procurements, property. You can see the list. It's all the activities there assigned to the PMO. We're going to go in more detail in each of these, but in general, the growth from just under 20 million up to 26.8. I think an important thing to note here is for this next year, we're not including the unallocated reserve in the program management office task. We've actually got that in program delivery. The large part of the unallocated reserve that we're really targeting would be the geotech work and surveying work that we'd like to do. And so parking that reserve funds with program delivery just makes more sense. You know, having that within the PMO resting there. There's no point for that. No, we pretty much have a good idea of how we want to spend it. But putting it in the program delivery phase does not limit how we can assign it over the fiscal year. So, you know, it still provides all the flexibility we need to manage our way through the year. Program initiation, you know what, it would probably make sense. Sorry, go back, Claudia, I'll wrap up my thought here. You can see the differences between the program initiation, program delivery budgets, but we will go through this in more detail as we work our way through the individual items. So unless there's questions here, I think we just keep rolling into the detail. Okay. Budget summary by vendor, again, looking at FY 24-25 compared to 25-26, you'll notice some pretty distinct changes. The largest being with Jacobs, who provides all of our engineering work. The biggest item there is that basis of design report. That's a very large effort, and it's a very heavy lift to move this overall project design in total 10%, going from 10 to 20%. So that's a very significant effort, and that largely accounts for some of the increase that we see between the two fiscal years. As you work your way down, a couple other notable items. I mean, I think the Parsons increase is pretty expected. We're ramping up. We have to bring on new staff. We have to fill some vacant positions and add additional resources in various components. But to me, that seems like a pretty logical change. AECOM, we're currently we show a pretty significant decrease. This funding is based on keeping them engaged through the fiscal year and then planning for a spring program. So that's what we have there in the 5.1 million. But there is a significant amount of unallocated reserve that we have also earmarked to be available for additional geotech if we're able to get out and do more work beyond that, or if the spring program ends up being something that can be more substantial. We want to have those funds in reserve. SOMAS, that's our surveying contractor. This is a new, they've had a contract for a while. It was it was essentially put to sleep for several years, but we've brought that back to life and are engaging our surveying contractor to consider getting out, doing some critical path surveying work around the site. So we've got $1.8 million identified for that within the proposed budget. Lucas Public Affairs, that's our new communications team. So this is really a placeholder at this point. There is not a task order in your package for Lucas Public Affairs because we're still in the process of sorting through the exact details of that task order and the associated costs. So we'll have that as a revision for the final budget. Right now, it's a placeholder based on past performance with our existing vendor. And we think that's a reasonable amount to plug into the budget for the time being. Several of the other items are, you can see just reasonable expansion, launch, Bender Rosenthal, they're a right away, launch is IT. We have quite a bit of new equipment that we need to consider for the program. It's time to start cycling through some of that stuff. So you're going to see that as we get into the more detailed reviews. Metropolitan Water District, some expansion in Bradner Consulting in my contract. We've got several placeholders now for what we call anticipated awards. And so these are all coming out of the executive support services contracts. So these are also not yet task orders for next fiscal year. We will, over the next few months, be negotiating and then issuing task orders. Our anticipated first award would be for Deputy Director Services. And then we're targeting another priority contract for facilitation services, but it may be that we decide also to try and accelerate negotiations for some of the other categories here, but right now our intention is to target those two to bring to the board in June. So several placeholders that are new for this year were not included in your packet as task orders, but we will have resolved in some way or another for the final budget adoption, either as including them in as separate items, as continued placeholders, or actually having the details sorted. Okay, keep going, please. So now we're going to go through the details based first on the work breakdown structure. And I know it's always tempting to try and read these details, but hang on, go back for me. I know Claudia was going to try and stop you from trying to read it, but the colors are really probably what's important. The program management office is the purple. So that's the first two columns there. So that's a whole bunch of different tasks and activities that are going to continue through all phases, through the duration of the program. Then the next is program initiation. So this is really associated with the engineering planning work. So this is the pre-delivery engineering. This is where all of the Jacobs team engineering work occurs. And this is where the BODR work will occur. But it used to include field work. Once DWR selected a final project, the field work that now is contemplated from now on moves into program delivery, because we don't want those costs attributed to the sort of the planning considerations. Ultimately, we do look at these costs at the phase level. And so we want to be intentional about where costs lie and how we track things. We don't want certain things to get muddied and confused because we parked costs in the wrong location. Program delivery, ultimately, this is where the bulk of the work will occur. Right now, this is just the early stuff. We've got the geotech, the surveying, whatever permit monitoring and compliance is necessary to conduct that work is all within program delivery. But over time, this is really where the most expansion is going to occur as the project does transition into the delivery phase. Next slide, please. So we're going to work our way through each of those items back on the first slide that had the breakouts. So this is the details associated with these costs. The executive office being first includes the chief engineer, includes the general counsel, treasury, HR. Down at the very bottom of that tiny little table, you can see what this was, where we held undefined allowance last year. We've got $0 in there right now. The point is, we don't want to split undefined allowance into multiple locations. Makes it more complicated to manage. We want to have it in one place. There's nothing that prevents us from tapping it and using it anywhere that we think is appropriate in terms of communicating and representing our view for how we think undefined allowance will be used. Is I believe it's best in the program delivery phase right now for budget consideration. We've been talking about the priorities. A lot of this is strategic leadership, the organizational transition, evaluation of innovations, the basis of design report, and really helping to strategize and support DWR's permit efforts. Next slide, please. Community engagement. So this is where we have had our existing vendor identified in the first column with numbers more distributed. And then the distinction is with Lucas Public Affairs coming on board, we have the 900,000 included as a placeholder attached to communications manager. But ultimately, as we flesh out the details of the task order, we'll see those numbers distribute more similar to the current fiscal year's distributions. So we'd see that 900 actually get distributed down through communications management, print digital assets, strategic planning, template development, and then further down into social media, website support. So that's a change that we may reflect in the final budget if we're able to get through the task order and sort through those. Otherwise, we may just leave them as they're currently shown. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you,
Sure.
Graham, but I just wanted to ask, do you want us to hold questions till the end of your presentation, or do you want to take them along the way? And I guess I'd ask committee members also, would you like to be able to comment and ask questions during Graham's presentation? Because I think we've got a long way to go yet.
Yeah, I welcome interruption.
Okay.
Yeah, otherwise the thought is gone.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make one comment that I've kind of wanted to make at the beginning, but I didn't jump in, but we've come a long way in explaining to the committee and even having a committee and where these numbers are coming from. And most of them are task order based. And I commented to you earlier yesterday about some are not task order based. My question about the task orders, and it's terrific that they're all referenced here. And there's another piece of information you provide to committee showing the task orders and a very detailed listing of what those task orders included. Who determined the scope of those task orders?
So it starts, we've got a couple of things we can work with. First of all, it's the scope of the master agreement that allows that vendor to engage with us. So each contract has a specific scope of services. So that first and foremost kind of sets the boundaries. And in some cases, we may have overlap in scope, but in many cases we don't. And so there's sort of the first high level distinction between the contracts is they have a defined scope in their master contract. Next would be a consideration around the org chart. So if we have a service that we need, and it may be a new service or an existing service, it's a functional question around the organization and what makes the most sense from a management perspective. So that kind of helps us sort of align and figure out where work items are going to lie within the divisions we've established. And then lastly, we're now really getting into more of a schedule-driven management process instead of just trying to instinctively identify what we think are the priorities. We're now more relying on the nuts and bolts of the schedule to identify the work that needs to get done to stick to schedule. And so it's kind of working backwards through that. We look at the schedule, what do we need to do? Look at the contracts that we have available, decide who's going to do it, and then build out the task order scope and budget accordingly.
So I'm trying to interpret what you just said. Does that mean the consultants, the major ones, the Jacobs and the Parsons, and did they propose to you or submit to you a list of task order that they envision this year to accomplish the overall goals that we've set? Or did you do that? Or was it done in combination?
It's more of a combination approach. I think we all collaborate on the schedule, which is really the key piece. And so then we establish what the high level milestones that we need to hit are. Then we turn it over to our teams to figure out, okay, what are the smaller steps that are going to be necessary to get there? Once we've kind of worked our way through that and agreed, then it's a matter of just putting those steps into writing and quantifying what it's going to take to get them done. And again, we iterate and study those steps, tasks, and costs that are proposed. And so it's a back and forth between us and the teams that are working on it.
That's great to know. I mean, the task order list is very helpful in being able to comprehend the amount of money that's going to be in that scope of work. So
good.
With that, I just wanted to ask that question before you went on. So
Sure.
Please continue.
Sure. I see Sarah's got her hand up.
Yeah. What you were talking about, Gary, basically brought this to mind. We were discussing this kind of thing early on in terms of how management of the various different vendors and their tasks merged. And so is that that's kind of tied into here in terms of having them communicate with one another so that they can not be redundant and be more efficient in terms of what they're doing?
Absolutely. That's right, Sarah. That was a big part of the reorganization process, is that we did need to establish those distinct roles and responsibilities. In some cases, if you think about our organization, it's not necessarily perfectly aligned with contracts. And so in some cases, we may have multiple contracts overlapping within one division. And so we do have to be very thoughtful about how we organize, taking into account both the functional work we need to do and the contracts that support it. But yes, that has been a big part of it, Sarah, is to be very clear about the roles and responsibilities of each function, which contracts are contributing to that function, and making sure that it's very clear so that you're right. There's not overlap, people stepping on toes, people getting confused about who's supposed to do what. dual ownership is kind of a killer. You know, there has to be clear ownership of issues.
And then also, like, I don't know, cooperation and between various different vendors as well. Does that come into this?
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. And I think we're all shifting, you know, I think the organization has been very effective at keeping the project first, looking for the resources, the best resources to get done, you know, whatever task is in front of us. But recognizing where we're going and the ramp up in front of us, I think it was the right time to kind of get in front of it and start to anticipate where we need to go and who's going to do what, and just be very, very clear about it. And so that then does, I think, encourage more collaboration between vendors, because there isn't any sort of silo defensiveness that could develop if there was some idea around sort of territorial disputes of work, that sort of thing. We just want to be very clear so that there just isn't any reason to engage in that type of thinking.
Well, we'll also to foster the attitude that all of it is working to the same goal.
Correct. That's right. That's right.
Before we continue on, Martin, do you have any questions before we continue on?
Well, it's kind of overwhelming that you have, if you look at all of these tables, and there's hundreds of costs, and that each one is, like you were talking about, we don't want to do it twice or 10 times. And just to get your hands around that many costs is a little bit, you know,
Don't think
hard to get your hands around. And you know, you could say, well, we could cut 10% of them easily. And, you know, how do you, you know, it's just kind of, there's so much. And that's a little overwhelming.
That's why we're paying Graham the big bucks.
So I appreciate that. I appreciate that, Marty. And I'm open to, we can sort of slog through this detail if that's the best approach. If you'd rather go to the table, the big table, we can just kind of navigate around the table. I can hit the high points here as we go through it and pause if you have any questions. So I'm happy to approach this in whatever way you think would be best.
My personal opinion, I don't think it's the committee's responsibility to check them. Whether there's some redundancy, I don't think. My big objective when we started this, to see where the numbers came from, to connect them with the actual scope of work and which consultants doing the work. I just don't think it's within our ability, and Martin, you pointed out the overwhelming nature of it, to actually go back in and check the numbers. I just want to get a grasp on where these numbers are coming from and who's doing what. That's basically my point.
Right. And that could
I
be.
agree with that.
Sorry, Marty.
I think the more global aspect of it is probably where we are. I mean, we can't go through all that stuff.
No.
And that's really not our responsibility. But we do have to, you know, realize that when you all add this all up, it's a lot of dollars. And you know, but I think the you know, the bigger picture analysis would be best for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're good in terms of overview. It is our responsibility to oversee this. It is our responsibility to make sure that that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, but it is not our responsibility to go into the minutia of management.
Right.
Yeah, my opinion of overseeing is that make sure there's something behind each number that's line entry in the document. So
because we as board members, we need to
propose,
stand behind that.
Yeah, if I could propose a suggestion as we go through this, I'd like to probably point out the what's changing, you know, and sort
Okay.
of provide that context, because I think, you know, you've seen how we perform over these now many years. And can, you know, we tend to be able to stick to our numbers pretty well. Our contingencies for the past several years have really not been tapped in major ways, and we have come in under a lot of times. I mean, there tends to be a fair amount of conservatism in our budgets, only because we don't know what the year is going to hold, and sometimes things can change pretty quickly. And you know, similar almost to those capacity conversations we were having in the board meeting, this tends to set the ceiling for the fiscal year. And then we work within that to maximize our progress and perform efficiently. That is needing to change, because we're now starting to really get out of kind of the permit support phase and into something that's really more driven by the overall schedule. And if we have funds available, and there's something else that we could be doing to advance the project and better position ourselves, we have to identify it and move it. And so I'm anticipating a different strategy over the next year, but it's probably going to be a little bit of a growing year for us in that respect. But I would, you know, if it's okay with you, we can just kind of go through each of these. I probably would focus on the numbers and just kind of point out what is driving the
Well,
differences.
Yeah, I don't mean to interfere with your presentation, but I just wanted to get those thoughts out.
Yeah.
So that you know where I'm coming from and the other committee members are coming.
I appreciate that.
All right, Graham, go on.
Okay, so let's go ahead and well, before we leave this one, so in terms of community engagement, if you look at the top line numbers at the very top, they're very similar. We have some expansion. Some of that is just going to be in terms of escalation on costs, but overall, in terms of a big picture, not a huge change here. Okay, so I mean, that's probably the key takeaway. The costs are distributed a little differently between the two columns. Some of that is a function of having not developed the details of the new task order. And, you know, really that's the main difference. Does that seem sufficient, committee members on that topic? Do you find that reasonable?
All right.
When you're talking about the new procurement, I'm sorry to bring it back to that. I can see the community liaison. Are we looking for somebody else to be running the community liaison
You know,
effort?
that's a placeholder that we've carried now for several years, and
Okay.
it's been at DWR's request. Because as they have been really taking the lead on the community benefits program, and we've engaged with communities, we wanted to have a potential place that we could tap to bring in a specialist with respect to community benefits programs. To date, we've not been asked to engage that type of resource, and we've been able to progress the work in using all of the, you know, we have broad resources internally. So, you know, it's their request that we continue that placeholder, but this is, you know, one of those spots where we just have it if it's needed. So far, we haven't tapped into it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I neglected to mention one other thing, so I'll
Sure.
just throw it out there. Yes, and I mentioned that the task order list is very helpful, but behind each line item in the task order, does the consultant submit a job hour estimate for the work and who's doing it and what level of compensation they're at, so that you can do the sanity check? Not that you do each one, by the way, I'm not suggesting that.
That information is prepared. We actually provide the template. We want all the information to come in a consistent format so that we can roll it up and distribute it and manipulate it into these different work breakdown structure presentations. And so we provide the templates for the detailed cost development so that it's all coming to us in the way that we want it in a consistent format. We double check the billing rates that are included because we have our own database of billing rates. That's how we check with invoices that are coming in. We check for consistency to make sure that we're being billed at the rate that we've approved. So those rates load into the cost spreadsheets, and then they're developed by person and by task. And so for each individual deliverable, we'll have a build up for those staff who are committed to the program long-term. You know, we have a number of program controls, administrative staff, others that are just on board for half-time, full-time, whatever it is. That's all in there by person as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Continue.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on unless there's questions here. And yeah, please let me know if you want to pause. I'll just kind of hit the high points and we'll just go through each one. Okay, go
All
ahead.
right.
So controls, let's start at the top line number. Last year or this current year, 4.9, it's going to expand up to about 6.7. The main difference here is that we're going to be bringing on new staff. Claudia's got her hand circled on risk management. Also, the past, really every year to now, risk management has been held actually within the chief engineer task. So it was in the executive office. This year, we're actually standing it up as its own item within the budget and moving it into its new home of program controls. So that's money that moved from executive office to program controls. Looking down, you see the cost manager and support staff. So this is the invoicing team that manages all the vendor invoices that come in, develop all the systems and processes for that whole, pretty complex system. And we do need to bring on new staff into that team. And so this is one of those areas that the increase in cost that you see at the top is a direct reflection of additional staff that need to be brought into that team. They're getting overwhelmed, and with the amount of work that we need to do, it's time to bring on and augment that team. Looking down, schedule management's pretty much the same. If you look at the black numbers, I know it's a little confusing. We have different levels of information that roll up within this presentation, but largely not major changes otherwise. It's really bringing on the new staff in the controls team, some tweaks here and there in terms of assumptions, but we've got risk management now clearly in this controls, overall program controls, and it's new staff that we're bringing on to augment our existing resources. Any questions on this one? Okay. Administration, very long. This is where all of our facilities, so this is rent, this is all of our furniture, our utilities, IT services, all of our software, everything is within this task. So looking at the very top line number, 3.56 growing to 5.56. Most of this is just expansion of users. We need to expand a lot of our IT access. It is time to upgrade or replace or refurbish some of the equipment that's used around the office. We are bringing in some new staff. So at the very top, you see the administrative manager and project admin staff is growing. Again, the team is growing. We have to bring on new resources to support that. That's a big increase, a big piece of the increase there. And then the rest is just expanded users. Any questions here about any of these numbers? I know there's a lot of numbers here, but that's really what's going on. I see Sarah put her glasses on. Do you have any questions, Sarah?
I don't.
Okay. All right, let's keep going. Procurement, contract administration. So in this case, really the big change is that our procurement manager needs more support. So we'll be bringing on more staff. I mean, that's really the key here. We're starting to do quite a bit more work. I think we're reaching the limits of the team that we have in place, and it's time to augment, bring on some new support. Our property team. So over the past year, we've really refined this organization a bit. Looking at the top line numbers, these are not huge changes, 1.02 million now to 1.27. It's really been mostly reorganizing this team, establishing Rebecca Green from Bender Rosenthal as the property manager and dedicating her time to an appropriate property manager budget and role within the program. And then separating out the other vendors, Hamner, Jewell and Associates and Associated Right Away, so that the three contractors, Bender Rosenthal, Hamner, Jewell and Associated Right Away, do not have overlapping scope. And so that's a contract management conflict issue. So we've distinguished distinctly the Bender Rosenthal scope of work, separated Hamner, Jewell and Associated Right Away so that we have full coverage, but that Rebecca is in a position to manage those other vendors without concern of conflict.
What's ROW? Sorry.
Associated, right away services.
Thank you. I should have known that.
Yeah, and so this is all about really the temporary entry permit work that we need to do. And so getting out and negotiating with landowners for temporary entry permits. And then you see down under the temporary entry permit item just below it, those are the actual payments that we would make to landowners to support those temporary entry. Otherwise not, and then COE deposits, those are court ordered entry deposits. So when we do enter court ordered entry, we have to put money essentially into escrow, into deposits to support those. So a lot of this budget, you know, you see it for next fiscal year, about 500,000 is associated with property payments. The remainder is associated with our property manager and then the supporting right-of-way consultants out in the field. Okay, next slide. Permitting management. This is a big, one of the items that has a pretty significant change. I think we've been talking about this big shift in terms of permits. It has been for the past several years, that liaison role that I described, just making sure that we're not getting big gaps in understanding between the engineering team here at the DCA and the permitting team led by DWR. We now need to really get our arms around the environmental compliance plan, the tools, the requirements. This team needs significant resource expansion. They're in the process of onboarding new team members. And really, this is about establishing the environmental compliance role and requirements going forward. So, you know, a big reflection on an area of the work that has significant expansion this next fiscal year. Going from 1.25 to close to 3 million. So it's more than double. Okay, next item. Health, safety, quality, sustainability, all holding pretty steady. Really no huge significant changes here. You know, you see kind of numbers, they're just consistent with the staff's current commitment to the project and slight nudges here and there, but really no big changes. Okay. Geotech management, survey management. So these are the management roles of those activities that are down in program delivery. So these are really just the staff associated with the in-house management team. So for geotech management, that role needs a lot more resources. It was historically a single person. I think we're to the point now where we know what's coming on the geotech front. You know, the current contract with AECOM is for data collection and reporting services through the end of 26. That's really kind of the planning phase scope of geotech work that we're talking about. But 27 and beyond, you know, it's orders of magnitude more work that has to be done from a geotech and field data collection. And we've got a lot of work to do within our systems to be ready to take in that information, quality control it, incorporate it into our system-wide databases and share that information with our designers and then contractors. So this is all about building the systems for the future. The amount, you know, the actual management of the geotech work, I mean, it depends on whether we're doing geotech work next year. This is largely about building the processes, building the systems, taking the data, figure out how to efficiently move it around and ensure that those who have access to it have access. Any questions on this one? Okay.
I would just comment, this is one area where we're very fortunate to have you and your background.
Yeah.
I don't think we could have any concern about the scope of this work.
Okay, thank you. And then survey management is new because we're standing up the surveyors. We're also standing up a new survey management role. So, and again, that's a very important role for the future. It relates to the engineering surveys as well as the property surveys that we in. Okay, go ahead, Claudia. Engineering. So last year we were at about 14 million. This is almost doubling now to 26. The bulk of it is down in that basis of design report item at 20.5 million. This is to do the engineering work to move from 10 to 20%. This is all of the documentation of that work that will be done. You know, that's a really big item. This is a significant portion of our budget. It's a third, you know, practically a third of the requested budget. This is a particular item that we're going to manage very closely and, you know, keep very close tabs on in terms of performance through the fiscal year. We're actually in the process now of the engineering team has been developing a very detailed implementation plan for this work product and this effort. It's really the entire engineering team that will be working on this. So that's a significant effort, really with its own work plan, its own delivery plan in terms of costs and milestones and all.
Do you have now, since you've got these numbers, a list of how many reports are going to be produced? And what subject topics are?
We do. There are deliverables within each task order. And
Okay.
so within each task order, there's a list of the reports and other deliverables that we expect. The BODR is one massive deliverable.
Right.
So actually, we're seeing the Jacobs contract go down. They've traditionally had, many tens, 30, 40, 50 individual work products, small memos, engineering work products that they're tackling as the individual items. This will be a much larger single deliverable that will come in. So their task orders actually got a significant reduction in overall deliverables.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the major changes here. We're not doing a bunch of facility studies next year. Project definition reports are no longer on the table. We're pivoting to a basis of design report. Okay. Next slide. So this was the old program initiation fieldwork task. We didn't fund it last year. We're not funding it this year. Fieldwork has moved to program delivery from now on. Okay, keep going.
This is where your unallocated allowances.
No, it'll be in delivery. This is so if you remember the 3 phases, this is the middle one, the program initiation phase of fieldwork, which is no longer the place that we're funding for fieldwork. Yeah. Here we are, program delivery. So this is the 3rd phase. This is where we're funding the unallocated undefined allowance. It's down at the bottom. It's a little over 5 million. Beyond that, it's the actual estimated fieldwork cost for a modest spring program. So that's sort of our realistic but relatively conservative guess at this point. And then we've got the pretty significant undefined allowance available to us if we're able to substantially ramp up and get more work done than we really wanted to lock up in a defined scope. I think this is it. Is that it for the details? Yeah. So any questions about all of that we just ran through? Or we can go to the big table if you want to look at it that way, or if you want to go back through any of those spots that you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I'll throw it open to committee, Sarah and Martin.
Pretty comprehensive to me. I mean, I looked at the big table, but
I'd go back there for me 1 second, Claudia. Yeah. I'll pause though.
Hitting the high points.
Okay. So I do want to flag an anticipated change in the numbers. And so let me give you some background here. So the board just approved amendments to 3 of the major contracts, Jacobs, Parsons, AECom. Of course, the not to exceed amount was a big topic, but within those terms, some of what we're also working on are the billing terms, creating more consistency in the exhibits and allowing for us to really figure out what we want to use as a billing structure going forward. What we've done now for the past several years has been this all-in rate approach where expenses are estimated at the beginning of the year along with the hours and essentially rolled into the rate as a way to represent and include those costs. We're moving away from that now as a baby step. We're not set on our full implementation approach, but we do know we need to move away from that all-in approach as we expand even in the next fiscal year, because we're requiring a lot more folks to come to the office in person. I think we've sort of run out the time when that all-in approach was the right approach. And so we are in the process of separating out those expenses, putting them into their own line items for each task order. I don't expect the overall budget amount to change. We're going to hang on. We're going to hold 65 million as our target budget. What I do expect to happen is for each task order, the individual labor rates to go down a little bit as they pull the expenses out. So the labor cost for each task order is going to go down, and those expense costs are gonna move down into their own separate items. So things are gonna change in the task orders when we come back with final numbers, sort of in a perfect world, that would not result in those task value changes. But what could happen is as we go through that and really dig into some of those expenses and kind of fiddle with some of those assumptions, we could be refining things and sort of tweaking some of the values, some of the total values within those tasks. My approach would be to use the unallocated reserve bucket as a way to kind of keep the overall budget the same and deal with those kind of nudges that we might have within the individual values. But I mean, I'm not expecting consequential changes, and they're not going to be based on hours changes. They're going to be based on our billing rate changes and moving those costs into their own individual items.
So based on what you've heard from the committee today, are you intending to have any updates for a potential June 12th finance committee meeting?
I do not have any updates based on committee feedback. I do have updates to the overall budget that I want to share with the committee on the 12th, because we're going to need to tweak these task orders. We're going to come with kind of just a new sort of set of numbers, but they're not going to be based on consequential or material changes. But I do want the committee to have the latest numbers.
So you'll be looking for a recommendation for approval at the June 12th meeting, not today.
That's correct. At the June 12th meeting. And if the committee still has any questions after the June 12th meeting, then we'll work it out before the June 18th.
And you'll be sending committee updated information before the June 12th meeting.
That's correct. We will send a package of final numbers to the committee, and yes, that's correct.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Question was this, I mean, and it's probably something I should know anyway, but when you said you're kicking off the cost estimate next spring, is that the cost estimate for the whole project?
Yes, that's the
Okay.
updated class 3 cost estimate for the whole project.
Okay, good, good. Thank you. I want to make sure I understood that correctly.
Yep, you are correct. Now, we won't daylight it until probably early 2027. So although it will be started, we'll be kicking it off in spring 26. It's a long and painful process, and we'll be getting lots of different reviews and views and analysis of those numbers, because as you know, we want the cost to be highly defensible, and there'll be key input into the economic studies that I'm sure will be teed up to support PWA decisions.
I'm looking forward to that because I've got some journalist interviewing me on Friday, and they've been saying, oh, 40 billion. I'm going, not really, but that's, yeah.
Well, I think a key consideration there is we've been very clear. $20 billion was not an escalated number. That's a cost in 2023 dollars.
Yeah,
Talking about it purely in terms of escalation totally negates the other side of it, which is the benefit side of it and the increasing value of benefits. And so if you're going to take a point in time, it's a point in time cost and a point in time benefit consideration. If you're going to look at it in a more sophisticated way and actually consider the cost over time, then you really have to consider the benefits over time, or you're just talking about half the issue. So it's a complex topic, and I think we're going to have to be prepared with the next cost estimate to likely address that more head on.
I'm going to have to do some more homework.
Yeah, we left it in the benefit cost analysis. We left the economic analysis to escalate the costs as well as the benefits, but I think we're probably going to need to hit that more head on with the next costs.
Martin, is there anything that you'd like to see by the next finance committee meeting?
Well, I think when he said he was going to refine some of the numbers, I think that's really important, because that'll frame the total cost and give us more accurate numbers. So I think we're going the right way, and we're looking at it in the right context. So I'm pretty satisfied that we're doing what we're supposed to do.
I would agree.
Great. Thank you.
All right, so this pretty much concludes this item, I think. So Then we move to, we ask any public comment on what they, public just heard, or? We
Yeah,
have
you
it?
should probably ask for it.
Okay, we're covered. All right, then we can move on to item 6, reports and announcements. 6A, verbal reports, if any. Any verbal reports from the committee?
Nope, just keep up your enthusiastic selves.
Yeah, good
Feeling
comment,
very
Sarah.
enthusiastic, Sarah.
We're just trying to follow your lead, Sarah. All right, we have no verbal reports other than Sarah's comment. So with that, we move to item 7, adjournment. Thank you very much, Graham and Claudia, Josh, and the team. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you very
We'll
much.
see you next month.
Good job.
Thank you.